What's the one thing people who love Sonic Colors criticize the game for?
Baldy nose hair!
Not surprisingly quick. There's no doubt that Sonic Colors had one of the worst Sonic stories in the series, but it still had something that the later Pontaff stories lacked. There's actually a lot of potential in this story, to a point where I'd say it could rival some of the series' best if all the improvements I talk about in this video are applied. But first, what was it about the original Colors' story that made it so awful to begin with? There's surprisingly only two fundamental flaws with this story that bring it down for people, and that is the dialogue and the voice cast. This was the first story in the series that was written by Ken Pontac and Warren Graff, but I prefer to refer to them by their shipping name, Pontaff. Many in the community will gladly point out the fanbase's distaste toward these writers. For Colors specifically, the characters just didn't really feel like themselves anymore, especially coming off of the amazing portrayals of Unleashed. Eggman's resorted to a laughingstock who never really gets taken seriously, instead being talked down to by everyone, including his own robots. Tails is now just the smarty pants tech kid, and Sonic is the generic, cool teenage protagonist. You can tell by the way I'm describing it that these changes made all of the characters very one-note, and this happened because Pontaff just didn't care about the original portrayals of these characters. They had no previous experience with writing a Sonic game, and have actively stated they didn't even really care about the franchise. Sega, if the writers don't care about the story you're making, why should I? It doesn't help that the humor in this game is absolutely awful too, which is a shame in my opinion, because there were a good few jokes in here that gave me a chuckle here and there.
Told you he had an evil plot, and coming here was a good idea. There it is, straight from the horse's mouth.
We didn't bet.
Dang.
The majority of them, though, are either just unfunny or genuinely unbearable. There's also a bunch of rushed and undercooked plotlines that felt added in at the last minute, like the arm getting stuck in the giant machine is obviously just there because they knew a reason for it to explode later. They also tend to set up plot points and then just ignore them for the rest of the story. For instance, Yacker goes missing at one point in the game. Oh, that's an interesting plot point. Are we going to focus on stopping Eggman or go back and chase our friend? Oh, never mind, he's back. No harm or anything, it just ran a little behind, I guess. It's this constant sluggishness with the way the plot points and characters are handled that make the Pontaff stories feel unpolished. As for the voice cast, it's actually mainly Sonic people have an issue with here. I'm with a lot of other people when I'm saying I'm not a fan of Roger Craig Smith's take on Sonic here. Don't get me wrong, Roger's actually a great voice actor, and I actually love him in a lot of other media, and he's even great as the announcer in this game.
Very good!
But he just doesn't have the vocal range to reach the young energy the previous actors had. I understand Sega wants Sonic to sound older in each era to sort of have him grow up with the players, and that could definitely work. But Jason genuinely felt like a natural evolution of Ryan, to a point where I completely buy him as an older version of Adventure Sonic. So then how's Roger any different? Well, first off, since Roger's voice is more fit for older characters, whenever he tries to sound like a teen, he just gets this skater dude, how do you do fellow kids vibe to him, and well, that's not really wrong. It's debatably just not who Sonic is. You can tell when he does this air puff at the end of his sentences.
Yeah. The only part I didn't hear was where I can find these creeps and aggressively recycle them.
Can you tell how it makes the delivery sound forced? Like he's trying too hard to sound cool. But ironically, the moment he's genuinely more laid back, he doesn't sound too bad.
Well, actually, I don't know where the emeralds come from. I usually don't go looking for them unless I need to stop Eggman from getting them first.
Secondly, there's also the fact that he just sounds too nasally, especially in the more recent stuff he's worked on.
Oh, sorry. I was just like, into the story, and then that egghead impression took me right out of it.
This nasally sound, combined with his more naturally deeper voice, makes for a big contrast to Ryan, and especially Jason, whose director literally told him to go from a nasally to a more laid-back approach, because that's just what works more for the character.
In the beginning, I definitely was more nasal, more Steve Urkel. I think it was a director who told me, all right, that's good, but let's try it now this way. He's more of a teenager, and he's more cool, and he's more laid back.
I've noticed Roger tends to sound best when he's not trying as hard, but unfortunately for Colors, since he was still trying to figure out the role here, it's not his best performance. So, now that we know what to focus on to improve the story, could Sonic Colors really have had one of the best Sonic stories of all time had these weak points been tackled during development? Let's go over the same talking points as before, but now, focus on the different ways we can improve upon them to end up with the best version of this story. The dialogue was no doubt the original's biggest issue, but what if I told you there's a version of this script that not only features more accurate portrayals of these characters, but also basically does all the work for us? Well, that would be Sonic Colors on the DS, which features a variant of the script that's completely different to the Wii version. Only excluding a few pre-rendered cutscenes.
This amusement park has been constructed entirely out of a sense of remorse for my past transgressions, and is in no way associated with any sort of evil plot or premeditated misdeeds.
Well, that's a relief.
That's a good thing that those were the only ones that were actually funny. There's a good chance that this version of the script was written before Pontiff messed with it, because there's a lot of Pontiff-y elements from the Wii version that weren't present in it. Like Tails' translator, it doesn't bug or mess up at all, it just works. Even at the end of the game, where the usual conversation is just when I got this thing working, they instead talk about how they just got used to talking through a machine. This version of the game also adds a bunch of cool additions of its own, like every Wisp getting introduced to Sonic as you come across him in the story, and the characters that weren't present in the Wii version appearing in the side missions. It makes the story feel polished and thought out. It even adds a Super Sonic boss in the same vein as most of the previous games, finding a way to cleanly insert the Chaos Emeralds into the plot, which was something that was missing from the Wii game. All of these improvements, combined with some of the cool new additions, makes me believe that this is the best version of Sonic Colors' story. As for the voice acting, we don't even need to completely get rid of Roger entirely, since there's actually times where he did a great job as Sonic. He was amazing as Sonic Boom, but that was only because the show was written around his Sonic voice. Sonic's personality is a lot different here. He's more of a lazy douchebag than a high-energy teen, and surprisingly, Roger pulls it off really well. Let me put it this way, if Ryan or Jason voiced Sonic and Boom, it straight up wouldn't work, because this is a version of the character that isn't the high-energy teen that we're used to. But Color Sonic is supposed to be that same character, which is why it sounds so off to have Roger trying so hard to get to that energy level. So, what could they have done to improve Sonic's character? Well, they could have written the game to be more in line with Roger's voice for Sonic, go for a bit more of a sarcastic, witty version of the character as seen in Sonic Boom. Or, an easier approach, Sega could have kept their contract with Jason going and could have kept him as the voice instead, since there's lines in Colors I can imagine him putting off really well. Colors' story is not just hated because it ruined the characters that people love, but also because it was a setup for the awful things that will return in future games. But if they just stuck with the original script from the DS version, took note of some of its cool additions, and maybe wrote Sonic to fit more of Roger's voice, Sonic Colors could have easily ended up as one of the best Sonic stories of all time. If you're still confused on the differences between the Wii and DS versions of this game, or maybe just want to know more about it, you should check out this video where I talk about everything you need to know. Still got it, baby.